Muito obrigada a todos os participantes e, em particular, à Aida pelo trabalho que teve de tentar coordenar os diferentes participantes, mas foi certamente uma sessão muito interessante. Vamos continuar com os nossos trabalhos. Vamos para o terceiro painel desta conferência. O tema agora é Cultura e Sustentabilidade Ambiental. Este debate contará com as presenças de Maria Teresa Adel, Henrique Gironat, não sei se é Gironat, Mariana Pestana, Sasha Kagan e Dan Rosegard. E será moderado por Mafalda Damaso, que estará em videoconferência, portanto vamos ter uma situação ao contrário da anterior. A Mafalda é investigadora visitante no King's College of London e passo-lhes desde já a palavra. Bem-vinda, Mafalda.
Boa tarde. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the invitation to chair this important panel with such an inspiring group of speakers. Muito obrigada, mais uma vez. Our panelists will be talking about the relation between culture and environmental sustainability, as you've just heard. However, as they do so, they will also be talking about the need to question boundaries, expand our horizons, and to be as ambitious as we can be. I hope you're ready. My name is Dr. Mafalda Damaso, as you've just heard, and I'm a researcher whose work focuses on the relations between culture and policy, with a particular focus on the European Union. And among other projects, I recently co-authored with the network Culture Action Europe a background review and a policy paper for the CULT Committee of the European Parliament. Why am I mentioning this? Well, these two documents review the situation of artists and cultural workers in the European Union, namely in terms of their working conditions, etc. And then they make recommendations to strengthen these dimensions in the post-COVID cultural recovery in the European Union. Now, we all agree, I'm sure, that such a cultural recovery is much needed. We also agree that this requires serious investment in the sector, which recognizes its value. Culture for culture, yes, and also its multidimensional impact in making the world better. However, the question is, what kind of cultural recovery do we want in the European Union? That's a question that we also have to address, and it's one that will permeate this panel. In this introduction, I want to add my voice to that of those who think that the cultural recovery should care not only for individual artists and cultural workers, but also for the planet. In other words, the post-COVID cultural recovery should not, in my opinion, bring us back to where we were before this awful pandemic. Instead, it should create a cultural sector that is much more sustainable, particularly in environmental terms. Our goal should not be to go back to where we were, but to create a much better future for the cultural sector, and this will be, by definition, a better future for the planet. But what does this mean in practice? What are we talking about when we say that culture can play a role in fostering environmental sustainability? Very briefly, I want to suggest that this potential can be fulfilled in two broad ways. First, of course, by changing artistic and cultural ways of working. How? By using fewer harmful products and materials when creating art, for example, or by recognizing the sector's carbon footprint, to which constant traveling around the world to attend biennials definitely contributes. But recognizing this doesn't mean that we stop making art or that we stop organizing exhibitions, but that we create alternative ways to guarantee that all of us can, for example, attend events around the world without having to travel there every single time, just like now. To summarize this first point, cultural work will be more sustainable environmentally when its negative impact on the planet is significantly reduced, if not zero. But is this all? Can we not be more ambitious? I think that we can. And in fact, the speakers from whom we will now be hearing are precisely asking us to do so. And this leads me to my second point. Culture can also intensify the speed towards environmental sustainability. And this is precisely what our panelists will be talking about, using culture as a catalyst for positive change that speeds up environmental sustainability beyond the cultural sector as well. We will be hearing that culture can enhance the preservation of landscape, that culture can speed up the transition to more collaborative ways of working, that it can exercise our creativity, our openness to change. And finally, we will be reminded of the power of culture to create moments of beauty. So let's begin. We will start by traveling to Portugal's neighbor, Spain. We will hear from Teresa Adel and Enrique Rigona, who work at the Mancomunidad Taula del Senya. They will be telling us about the fantastic work that they have been doing to preserve the landscape of the Senya territory by protecting ancient olive trees. Teresa and Enrique, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Teresa Adel, and I am the manager of the Mancomunidad Taula del Senya. I'm responsible for the CPAM Olivos Milenarios Territorio Senya. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this conference about culture and environment sustainability. The Senya territory consists of 27 municipalities from three different regions, 15 Valencian towns, 9 Catalan towns, and 3 Aragonese towns. It has an area of 207,000 hectares and a population of 112,000 people. We have uncommon history, language, culture, tradition, and also the existence of a high number of millenary olive trees in our territory. We will now explain how we are working to preserve and enhance their value. As I have problems with the language, I pass the word to my colleague Enrique Girona, who will explain the project of the millenary olive tree of the Senya territory.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. In this picture, you can see the landscape known as the Sea of Olive Trees of the Senya territory. In our area, the main crop is the olive tree, having 33,500 hectares of rain-fed olive groves and only 275 hectares of irrigated land. Olive groves stand for 16% of the total surface of the territory. Our project has its origins in the concern of local people about the spoliation of millenary olive trees that have been occurring, a lot of them being removed from the land, sold, and moved elsewhere as decorative elements. From the Mancomunidad Taula del Senya, the first action carried out was to make an inventory of all the 1,000-year-old olive trees that we had. This inventory was made in 2008 when 4,080 millenary olive trees were registered, having more than 3.5 meters of front perimeter at 1.3 meters above the ground. Nowadays, the inventory has grown up to 6,500 millenary olive trees and has specimens of more than 10 meters of front perimeter like the one shown in the picture. This is an example of the record used to store information of each olive tree, with all the measurements, characteristics, pictures, and location. This olive tree, named La Farga de Larion, has been dated as being 1,707 years old. The olive tree is still producing fruit and is already delighted the Romans, since it was planted in the times of Constantine the Great. The Polytechnic University of Madrid has dated some olive trees of our territory, and their ages range between 1,000 and 1,700 years old. Having geolocated all the olive trees that we have in the inventory, we concluded that its placement matches the one of the Roman Via Augusta, which clarifies the age of the olive trees. The olive tree and the culture of oil have always been very present in our territory through history. Here you can see millenary olive trees next to a medieval castle or another olive tree next to a baroque dome, and also oil mills of medieval times that have been in operation until the early 20th century and now have been rehabilitated as interpretation centers. In the last few decades, millenary olive trees have been seriously endangered by spoliation. We have been working for almost 15 years to protect these trees and make sure their value gets recognized, raising awareness among farmers and landowners and helping the draft of protective laws. In the pictures, you can see the acts of recognition to the farmers who preserve their olive trees and produce certified oil. This is a picture of the harvesting process of one of these olive trees. It's done manually and with the greatest respect for the tree. And at the bottom, you can see the 16 brands of oil that are being marketed, certifying their origin and quality through the Aceite Farga Milenaria warranty brand. This brand has a regulation of use approved by the three autonomous communities and the Ministry of Agriculture. The management organism is mixed, 50% public and 50% private. It guarantees that the origin of this oil is only from olive trees with a trunk perimeter of more than 3.5 meters, and that its quality is premium. All the bottles bear the seal shown in the image. All of this has been possible with sustainable resource management, keeping unchanged the ancient lands with autochthonous varieties that are well adapted to the environment, and a very low crop density, 50 to 70 olive trees per hectare. 95% of all millenary olive trees are of the Farga variety. The olive grove is rainfed, so it doesn't harm the scarce water supply. Dry stone constructions are still being used to prevent erosion, keep humidity levels stable, avoiding strong wind consequences, and maintain biodiversity. In the Senia territory, dry stone structures and olive grove landscapes go hand in hand. In addition, all the agricultural and livestock activity of the Senia territory maintains a balance and is closely interrelated. The cultivation of the olive grove needs and at the same time favors other activities, both in the primary and tertiary sectors. This results in a sustainable system, both economically and environmentally. In recent years, different efforts are being carried out to recover abandoned millenary olive trees. This has been done by small farmers and entrepreneurs who have seen employment and business opportunities in the production and sale of oil from millenary olive trees. Here are some photographs of the recovery of these olive trees and the restoration of the landscape. An important development of oil-related tourism has been made lately. In recent years, we've seen an increase in the number of people who are looking for this type of tourist product, which can be fully integrated with farming. Activities like visits to open-air millenary olive tree museums, guided tours, tastings and samplings, itineraries, festivities, and symphonic concerts. Plantations of local products and oil under the olive trees and cultural activities such as concerts, theater plays, and poetry readings. We also have the collaboration of the restaurants in the area that have been totally involved in the project. Millenary olive trees oil is perfect for pairing with other local products like the truffle. In the best restaurants of the territory, we can find dishes inspired by millenary olive trees and using their oil. In the pictures, you can see three examples. We have a growing gastronomy tourism attracted by high quality and broad offer. In the Senia territory, there are 3 restaurants with a Michelin star. From the Mancomunidad Tabla de Senia, we work to disseminate and promote the culture of olive oil. Activities have been carried out in all the schools of the territory so that from childhood they learn to love and respect these trees. We attend fairs, participate in institutional events, celebrate the anniversary of some olive trees on their birthday, and organize festivities around these trees. Numerous educational activities are carried out. Cultivation and pruning of millenary olive trees, oil production, tastings and samplings, and every year in November, a congress is held with the participation of national and international experts. We have 2 traveling exhibitions dedicated to millenary olive trees, different publications about olive trees, oil and gastronomy of the zone. We keep presence on social media and have a website with information related to our project. All of this work has been rewarded with national and international awards and recognitions, such as Hispania Nostra Award, Europa Nostra Award, and the Council of Europe Landscape Award. The millenary olive trees of the Senia territory have also been declared important agricultural World Heritage System by the FAO for meeting all the requirements: agrobiodiversity, food security, culture and value system, local knowledge system and tradition, and landscape. We are currently working on an Interreg Sudoe project called BALSIPAM, which aims to create a network of CIPAM territories to improve their management and valorization methods. 9 partners are involved, including 2 Portuguese partners, the Associação de Desenvolvimento da Região do Alto Tâmega and Rota do Guadiana. Thank you very much for your attention. We are pleased to invite you to visit our Millenary olive trees. And finally, we leave you with a 2-minute video where you can see a small sample of the olive tree landscapes of the Serralves territory. Thank you.
Thank you for such an inspiring presentation. I have a very quick question. You said that olive groves favor other activities and that this results in a more sustainable system. Do you think you could share very briefly with us one example of those activities? And then very quickly in one sentence, since we won't have a Q&A, if you were in place of European decision makers and for one day, and you could do one thing to unleash the power of culture to support environmental sustainability, what would you do? Very quickly. Thank you.
So the first question, all the agricultural and livestock activity of the territory maintains closely interrelated. Olive growing needs and at the same time favors other activities both in the primary and tertiary sectors. One example might be the use of organic manure from cattle grazing in the cultivation of olive groves. And at the same time, the byproducts of oil processing are used as biomass for heating farms, as organic fertilizer in agriculture, or as a feed supplement for extensive livestock farming. The tertiary sector, tourism, commerce, restaurants, is also closely interrelated with the millenary olive trees. Just as an example, we will mention a guided tour that passes through the ancient Roman Via Augusta, through the Museum of Ancient Olive Trees of Arion, through an all meal and ends in a restaurant with 1 Michelin star. Tasting the menu of the oil and also during the tour you can buy some of the oil. This results in a sustainable system, both economically and environmentally. And regarding the second question, in our case, we will make a law of protection at an European level of the natural heritage, which will guarantee the conservation of our cultural and natural landscapes. At the same time, we will need to have the necessary budget allocation to guarantee this goal is accomplished. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Fascinating and important points. Thank you so much again for your fascinating and beautiful presentation. We will now move back from Spain to Portugal, actually to Serralves, and from there we'll then get into the sea. Dr. Mariana Pestana is an architect and independent curator. She's also a member of the collective The Decorators, an interdisciplinary practice that makes collaborative public realm interventions and cultural programs. She is also one of the members of the Portuguese working group on the new European Bauhaus, which she will briefly present. Mariana, the floor is yours.
Obrigada. Só tirar a máscara. Muito obrigada, Mafalda. Boa tarde a todas e todos. É obviamente uma enorme honra para mim estar aqui hoje e poder apresentar a minha perspectiva sobre este tema tão importante. E por isso queria começar por te agradecer a ti, Mafalda, a apresentação. Eu vou falar em inglês por uma questão de melhor entendimento com o resto dos panelistas e, portanto, peço desculpa por mudar para o inglês. So, let me... All right, okay. So I thought I would start with an image of a power plug, which is this such a discrete, tiny design object in every home. I don't think anyone here can imagine living, however, without one of these or many of these. And this power plug is very special and because it exhales smoke, because it gives consumers back the pollution caused by their energetic intake, and it's a project by the artist collective Hehe. And I chose to start with it because we live really in complex times, because despite living in a serious, in an undeniable climate crisis, we are unable, or seemingly, to imagine a world otherwise. And so our ideas of comfort and progress are incompatible with the changes, the necessary changes that we will have to make in order to overcome the current crisis. So this will be my main point today. How may we reset our ideas of comfort, of progress, of development, in order to ensure an equitable future for ourselves? Because I think that what's at stake is a cultural transformation. A cultural transformation that puts values such as care and affect at the forefront of the art, design, culture equation. When Paul Crutzen came up with the famous term Anthropocene in the year 2000, he assigned the start of this new geological epoch marked by human action to the year of 1784. The year when James Watt patented the steam engine, which is symbolic of the start of industrialization. So if we leave aside the controversies about the term Anthropocene, of course, and the specific date that its beginning is attributed to, one thing is very clear. We've established a link between technological progress and climate change. Inventions of the 18th century, such as the steam engine, were produced alongside philosophies and post-Enlightenment philosophies that promoted ideas of technological advancement and progress that are very specific. So now, in the 21st century, what new systems of thought, what new ideas might this ecological awareness that we have now, what might it inspire is my question. Oh. My image disappeared. Okay. So at the moment, our relationship with nature, with the earth, is opportunistic, instrumental, extractive. We treat nature as a matter to be used to serve our purposes, forgetting that resources are limited and that piercing, drilling, breaking the earth has dramatic consequences such as the exhaustion of those resources and the unbalancing of ecosystems. This is a virtual simulation of Spindletop Hill in southeastern Texas. Okay, thank you. It keeps going away. In southeastern Texas in the United States, where there was once a booming oil industry. So many of the major oil companies in America, such as Texaco, for example, or Exxon, trace their origins there. And famously, in one day, the Lucas Geyser, as it was called, this place, produced more oil than the rest of the world's oil fields combined at the time. But today, it's exhausted. And it is this deserted landscape of Spindletop that makes the background of John Gerard's work, Western Flag. On the landscape, the artist places a flag of perpetually renewing pressurized black smoke, which is what you can see here. And in doing so, it provides us with a vision of the Western unconscious, because despite knowing that fossil fuel is finite, the so-called developed world continues to exploit it as if there was no end. Okay. Sorry, it seems like my pointer isn't working. So even the so-called green energies have an extractive nature, many of them. Think of the empire of Elon Musk, often quoted as the hero of sustainability. His dream of Tesla is a dream of electric cars, but itself is supported by an idea of a gigafactory of electric batteries. And these batteries are made of lithium, which is extracted. Unknown Fields Division, who are a group of architects, documented this effect in Bolivia and the Atacama Desert to reveal that even the cleanest energy utopias have dramatic consequences of material, resource, economic exploitation. And their work draws a relational geography that connects the consumption of batteries in the North Hemisphere with the extraction of resources in the South Hemisphere. It is estimated that at the current rate, 20% of the planet's species will have disappeared in 2030. A 2019 Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change global report showed that nature is declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history, but stating that around 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, as I'm sure you all know. This means that in the coming decades, societies will have to face changes to the state of the planet for which they are not culturally or biologically adapted. This is a simulation of Sudan, the last male northern white rhino, created by artist Stacey Ginsberg in collaboration with DeepMind, the AI company that you probably know. She made a digital replica, an AI agent version of the rhino when it died, when the last one died in 2018. And she called it the substitute. And this was to explore a paradox. Our preoccupation with creating new life forms through technological means, such as artificial intelligence, while neglecting existing forms of life. In order for our own species to guarantee its future survival, two key ideas are fundamental, in my perspective. One of them is coexistence. We are part of complex geopolitical networks that interlink northern and southern hemispheres. So key to a new cultural paradigm is a critical understanding of progress and development. And at what cost this development, this progress is produced. This is a project by architect Dele Adeyemo, called Cosmogonies of Racial Capitalism, which shows how sugarcane plantations in the island of Madeira have propelled the birth of global capitalism and transformed notions of race in the process. And Dele proposes a new kind of cartography in which he is working with and developing a methodology for, as with his students and as a research center, that overlaps European and African viewpoints. The interdependence and coexistence of humans within larger ecosystems has been subject to many interdisciplinary discourses with a greater emphasis in the last decades, from anthropology to philosophy to science. And so I am very much aligned with those discourses, and because of them I ask, how may art, architecture and design be understood as a tool, as an interface that mediates relationships between different bodies? And obviously many of those are human bodies, social bodies, but also biological, geological, mineral and machinic bodies. So how do they all coexist? This is a project by Fraud that investigates the EU-Morocco Fisheries Partnership Agreement and its devastating effects upon extra-Mediterranean marine life, such as the exhaustion of fish stocks and local fisheries. And so it looks at the genealogy of the European Union's extractive capitalist gaze and proposes instead an active, intercultural and critical building of a counter-colonial cosmogony. Both of these projects were produced in the context of the Library of Land and Sea at the Istanbul Design Biennial, where we commissioned 10 research projects in the region of the Mediterranean. And all of them investigate how our current regulatory extractive relationship to land and sea are shaping the region. And this kind of research is very important, and it's also a part of cultural production, because in order to survive in the future, we must design for ecosystems, not for individual clients. This is a drawing of an architectural project that is now built in Texas, and we showed it at Ecovisionaries, an exhibition that took place in Lisbon, at MAT, then in Matadero, in Madrid, and then at the Royal Academy in London, as well as in many other European cities. And actually, all of the images I've shown you are from that project, except the two last ones. But this project is very important because, in my view, it sets a new paradigm for architecture. The house is equipped with a filtering device that cleans the water of the lake in which it is situated. So it contributes to the well-being of the ecosystem, not just the individual client that commissioned it, right? We used to think of humanity as something that defined us in opposition to nature. Reason and soul divided us from the rest of the world, but of course, now in the post-Anthropocene, we are aware of the extent to which Earth and humans are interdependent. So to survive, I think we must become earthbound, as Bruno Latour says. In other words, our species will have to adapt to this environment that it transforms. So this is the second key idea that I want to put forward, the idea of adaptation. If we have designed our own possible extinction, as many put it, can we design our way out of it? And I think yes, of course, but we have to reassess some of our notions of progress and of comfort. So for example, at the Istanbul Design Biennial, very recently, we have equipped a gastronomy school with a solar kitchen. We equipped a high school with a family of food preservation units, which I hope you can see, using burial, drying, and smoking methods. Progress is not a linear path. We may have to look backwards to have a future horizon, I think. We have also, of course, used state-of-the-art technologies, such as DNA sequencing. So for example, we sequenced the DNA of microorganisms of all the horticultural gardens in Istanbul. I'll just leave it like this. But we did this, we sequenced their DNA to find their ancestry and their families in order to be able to tell their stories to future generations. So this storytelling aspect is the most important for us. So we are in face of a new design paradigm, the idea of designing for the more than human, considering the people, the landscapes, the many species that are always inevitably impacted by design. And I've called these designs for more than one. So design practices that consider more than one perspective, more than one body, more than one dimension. They don't design for one client, but they design for ecosystems. And it is with this more than human agenda and the desire for decentering, the human from the design equation, let's say, that I co-wrote a vision for the new European Bauhaus called Bauhaus of the Seas. And I did this together with Nuno Jardim Nunes, Miguel Figueira, Heitor Alves, and Frederico Duarte. The oceans are precious ecological device, of course, storing most of the CO2 that we produce. They are a condition shared by many European cities, so our proposal is cohesive, gathering together 4 European countries. Our proposal wants to reconcile with the seas, not explore the seas. It wants to reconnect with communities and learn from the bottom up. We want to involve citizens in imagining and rehearsing alternative, truly ecological possibilities for design. And so this is an interdisciplinary endeavor to imagine different futures. And I see it as a traveling laboratory of ideas, a testing ground to experiment with more than human design. A place where design is a form of interspecies diplomacy, where our relationship to nature is not extractive, but it is empathic. It's a school because it wants to draw a new paradigm for design that inspires future generations to create architectures, objects, let's just go back. Architecture and objects and situations that privilege the well-being of more than one. So it's a collective, interspecies, ecological vision for design. So I apologize, the slides didn't work so well because I think the pointer maybe isn't working properly. But to end, I just want to end with a thought, because histories of evolution, post-Enlightenment histories of evolution, have often focused on rational achievements and disregarded the role of affect, the role of feelings. And I wanted to remind you of how neuroscientist Antonio Damasio puts it, reason and intelligence's purpose is care. Caring is a fundamental aspect of survival, because feelings are what guides homeostasis, this necessary balance between any entity and its environment in order for it to thrive into the future. And so my call is for developing a cultural space, cultural programs that promote a more than human agenda, design, art and architecture practices that put care at the forefront. Because I think that to make an environmental transition, we need really, and above all, a cultural transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mariana, for this thought-provoking presentation. Some of the keywords in your presentation were coexistence, designs for more than one. So I'll just ask again a very quick question. Am I correct in thinking that a mindset of collaboration across borders, both physical but also disciplinary, that mindset is central to the working group's vision of the new European Bauhaus? And then a very, again, quick question, if you could just tell us, again, if you were in the place of European decision makers and you had one day, what would you do? One thing that you would do to unleash the power of culture to support environmental sustainability? Your presentation was so nuanced. I'm sorry that you don't have much time to answer these questions, but yes, thank you so much again. And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, big questions, right? But yes, I definitely, the answer to your first question is yes. It is an interdisciplinary and a pan-European vision, which is forming now. So we are forming a consortium across European countries, so territories that we are linking through the sea. But I would say that it's above everything an ecocentric project. So we want to challenge or transcend ideas of nostalgia, of Eurocentrism, anthropocentrism, and I think our positioning is critical of a development model based on economic growth built on extractivism. And of course it promotes a more than human agenda. I I think it is above everything a space of experimentation. You know, I always think of cultural programs like a state of exception that you can create as a place that's kind of separated from reality, because many ideas and they cannot exist straight away in reality. They need to be tested and nurtured before. And so I suppose a roaming structure like this and multi-centered structure, I think, you know, I see it working very much like what is a laboratory in the field of science, or what is, you know, in economic language, often we talk about incubators. So I don't know, in the cultural sphere, perhaps we can think of cultivators or, I don't know, nurseries for projects. But I think it's very important that they exist in connection with everyday life. They're not separated from reality, which is the case of a laboratory, for example, for every kind of, for various reasons and very good ones. But in the case of culture, I think that these experiments, they need to be happening in tandem with everyday life. I think that's really important. And your second question, I don't know, I think often about how the list of ingredients in food products, for example, really revolutionized our role as consumers because we became aware. I think Latour said we became Pasteurians, right? When we were able to read, to know what's inside every package of food we take from the supermarket. And I think it's interesting to think what the equivalent would be in terms of provenance of products and in terms of their ecological impact. So what's the carbon footprint of, you know, this chair? Perhaps there could be a similar system for tagging products with provenance and carbon footprint. Yeah.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. And again, it highlights the need to think about these issues holistically and not just within the cultural sector. Again, thank you. We will now move to the Netherlands. No, actually, we will not move yet to the Netherlands. Apologies. We will move to, well, Germany. We will hear from Dr. Sacha Kagan, a French habilitant at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Studies at Leuphana University in Germany. Sacha has written extensively about what he calls the transdisciplinary field of arts and unsustainability, and I think that his talk will really connect with these final comments by Mariana. Sacha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mafalda. Yes, I'm very, very glad to have listened to you, and I hope the transition will work smoothly, and of course very thankful also to the organizers. And I was first wondering, I'm going to talk about, you know, an overview of ecological art, something that you made, made this great kind of presentation. So I will focus now more on a few ideas, a few notions, a few principles within this discussion. Culture, oh, let me see the slides. Oops, that this works, okay. Yeah, just checking it works, the right button. I will try again. In which direction should I go? Where is the sensor? Okay, it works. Okay, great. Great. So culture and the arts have a possibility to play a crucial role for procedural sustainability. This means not to assist governments in prescribing and implementing prefabricated sets of supposedly sustainable values and behaviors, but to inform and stimulate a societal search process for desirable futures, always modulated according to context. Sustainability is then a search process that is not only about established facts, but also crucially about mobilizing critical imagination in participative, we already heard about that in the previous panel, very, very, very well, discussed. So participative and socially creative processes, while sharing the best possible understandings of the trade-offs of our choices. These understandings are coming from science and equally from all other sources of human knowing across society. Procedural sustainability is a cultural mission. The polycrisis of unsustainable development is not simply a crisis of wrong values that would just need to be replaced with some right values, like some kind of failing parts in an engine. It is a crisis related, among other things, to both this kind of separation thinking that we even find in the way we talk about sustainability, for example, when we talk about pillars, very problematic metaphor, or about environmental sustainability as if there were different sustainabilities, and also is related to the failures of a modern social imaginary of planning and control that mistakes sustainable development for an engineered, regimented roadmap to a better future. The arts and culture can help us out of this dead end by helping us learn to better deal with complexity and uncertainty. That is why some researchers, myself included, insist on developing a culture of complexity and aesthetics of complexity. Sustainability, then, is a generative journey of discovery of desirable futures, allowing the democratic emergence of alternative futures. For all these reasons, the sustainability researcher John Robinson famously proposed that, I'm quoting, sustainability is not just about proving the world more real, but about proving the world more imaginary, end of quote. But what do we mean by culture and aesthetics of complexity? This is about always looking for the connections between, the slides are not moving, okay. Yes, between social, cultural, economic, and ecological issues, and not simply addressing the different dimensions of sustainability as separate problems. This is about becoming more perceptive to the complex interrelations between us and the worlds we share with many others. This is about addressing the limits of individualistic egocentrism, patriarchy, heteronormativity, racism, ethnocentrism, certain forms of anthropocentrism, the various theories of everything, whether technoscientific, and we've heard also some of that, also even within our own discourses here, religious, economic, or political, that claim to reduce the crisis solution to some single formulas and then advocate some short-sighted problem fixing. It is about seeing how these limitations intersect with each other, causing short circuits. That's something that Gregory Bateson was explaining quite well. Short circuits in our responses to the polycrisis of unsustainable development. It is also about healing from this extreme hubris in recent forms of economic and technological developments, as noted, among other places, in the Convivialist Manifesto. Not to reach for the illusion of altruism and emancipation from all attachments, but as a reckoning of interdependence and of the many ambiguities and ambivalences we need to navigate while finding a balance between different attachments. When I introduce the aesthetics of complexity to my listeners, when I introduce the aesthetics of complexity to my listeners, I like often to quote Edgar Morin's metaphor of the musical ear. So, opening quote, the system's sensibility will be like that of a musical ear which perceives competitions, symbiosis, interferences, overlaps of themes in one same symphonic stream, where a brutal mind will only recognize one single theme surrounded by noise. The arts are especially well placed to lead in fostering such a culture of complexity, fueling a continuous arts-based cultural education in society. However, this is a very difficult goal, as we generally tend to fall back onto taking shortcuts, looking for quick fixes, and shutting down contradictions. Here, the arts are always fighting an upstream battle. This is also not helped by the very low level of arts education in general, in the general population across Europe. Pragmatically, innovative formats of artistic interventions in society, we saw some of them today also again earlier, These innovative formats count among the attempts to address that difficulty. And they have a mixed history of part success and part failures, which is way beyond the scope of my talk today. Sustainability goals compel the arts and cultural organizations to address multiple dimensions at multiple levels with broad and interrelated goals that includes, among other things, the engagement with ecological issues, decentering the exclusive focus on human agents, together with sound practices of daily environmental management. This has been exemplified, for example, by Julie's Bicycle in the UK with lots of good resources on the internet. And at the same time, practices that open to all layers of society include marginalized and oppressed minorities and seeking social justice, while at the same time seeking the personal fulfillment of employees, volunteers, partners, audiences, partakers, etc., as well as not only the economic viability of those involved in the cultural sector, but also a contribution to a search for reforms towards ethically more desirable economic systems. For example, questioning the self-exploitation which is rampant in the creative sector, and questioning, of course, neoliberal logics, among other things. And last but not least, this very cultural goal of contributing to shape systems of meanings in European societies, their so-called symbolic universe. This also gives cultural organizations a mandate for idealism and the questioning of hegemonic norms, not merely some superficially green awareness raising. One good example of an arts organization with a format that strives to address all of these goals as well as their interconnections, you might already know it if you've been around Brussels sometimes. This is at the Kai Theatre in Brussels, where they especially had this Burning Ice Festival from 2007 to 2016, sorry for my English. That was back then when Guy Hapens was taking care of it. Cultural organizations have a responsibility along 3 axes. Now it's 2 at a time. Okay, I have to go back. Yeah. Have a responsibility along 3 axes of constituency, as it illustrated in the graphic on the slide. An axis of space, the big here, which is about relating the various spatial scales from the local to the planetary, and of course with all the scales in between. An axis of time, the long now, which is about relating the various temporal scales from the remembrance of the long dead to the needs of the not yet born, past, present, future generations, from cultural heritage to speculative fiction writing. And an axis that is networking community and otherness. One could call it a deep web, which is about relating the various scales of both identification and disidentification. I would warn against talking about cultural identities. I won't have time. Please read François Julien, for example. There is no cultural identity, a very nice little book. So, but rather I would talk about various scales of identification and disidentification, from the ego to the socios, the anthropos, the oikos, sometimes even the cosmos. Let me quickly illustrate this. Looking at the big here, one vivid illustration could be the installations of one German artist, Hermann Josef Hack, who is known for his World Climate Refugee Camp, as you see on the slide, which he installed at various sites outdoors and indoors over the past decades, public squares, art galleries, etc. Looking at the long now, one example could be the project, I will try again. Looking at the long now, one example could be the project Linden Fiction 2050. That was a creative writing workshop for local inhabitants of one district of Hanover, Linden, in Germany, organized at an alternative cultural center, Faust, where participants wrote short stories of speculative fiction that were navigating ambiguously between critical utopias and dystopias of various futures for their own neighborhood. Looking at the deep web, one example could be the eco-sexual manifesto by the artists Annie Sprinkle and Beth Stevens, with their wedding ceremonies that they celebrated together with big crowds of participants, marrying the sea, marrying the moon, marrying a forest or marrying a coal mine in Spain once. And more generally, celebrating a joyful, erotic reunion with the earth as our lover, rather than the usual earth as our mother. They, meanwhile, inspired a worldwide movement of people calling themselves ecosexuals and claiming erotic relationships with planet Earth. Especially promising are what my colleagues and I have been analyzing as urban spaces of possibility, experimental and imaginative spaces in the city where cultural agents cooperate transversally with agents from other socio-economic sectors and sometimes even with the municipal authorities, especially with these authorities that do dare to engage beyond the traditional sectoral policy making. And here I mean going far beyond cultural policy, specifically cultural policy. For multiple concrete examples in a city I was researching with colleagues extensively, Hanover in Germany, where this actually did happen to some extent, this much more transversal policy making in collaboration with civil society, I invite you to look at my documentary film, which is freely available on YouTube, called Hanover. Our research highlighted specific qualities that make up the realized or the squandered potential of spaces of possibility. A detailed discussion of these qualities would take too much time for now. I will just mention them very quickly. This is about how they thematize sustainability, how they engage the imagination, how they open up experimentation, more or less like a lab, like you mentioned, or more or less an open-ended experimentation. How they foster creativity. Whose creativity? Individual or collective social creativity. How much do those spaces leave for indeterminacy and for emergence? How do they develop participation and cooperation? Which qualities of cooperation? Because many different ones, as we also heard earlier today. The question also whether they offer spaces for the most vulnerable processes and experiments. That's what is meant by this more scientific term, heterotopic, which is from Foucault. I won't go into details of that. Another question is how they network with different parts of society within the city, across the city, what kind of transversal networks exist in civil society which are way beyond, so to say, the purely cultural, one could say. And finally, how do they interact with public authorities? Which are interactions between confrontation and cooperation. Let's not talk naively only about cooperation. Okay, I think that was all for the presentation part on my side. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Sasha. We don't have much time, so again, I'll just ask you one question, 1.5, and would ask you to try to really be succinct if possible. And the first question is, you propose to see the environmental crisis as a crisis of imagination, a very powerful idea. And then you talked about the mandate for idealism. You mentioned this very briefly, but could you just highlight some practical ways how practices of imagination can be embedded and institutionalized? And then my second question, I'm not sure if you want to address it, maybe you want to deny, question its premises, but it's the question that I asked our other panelists. If you were in the place of European decision makers for a day, and you could do one thing to unleash the power of culture to support environmental sustainability, what would that be? Very briefly, please.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll try to be brief. For the first question, there's a number of really interesting examples, concrete cases that would be worth looking at. One of them is the Tag des Guten Lebens, the Day of Good Life in the city of Köln, organized by a coalition of about 100, 150 different very local actors, which is really activating the imagination and the creativity of inhabitants street by street. In short, this is a car-free Sunday, but it's not like any of the other car-free Sundays in Germany where you have, kind of top-down organized imaginations of how different your city could be without cars. In this case, these are really street by street. People meet in every couple of streets. There is a local organizer. They meet about their specific street and they imagine, and then they implement, they organize the creativity differently street by street. So when you visit this event, every single street has a different imagination of the possible future urban development without the cars. So that's one example. Another good example, completely different, going now much more to the top, is the example of the project of the Embedded Artist Project organized in the city of Chicago by artist and architecture scholar Francis Whitehead, which is really about not just artists in residence, but artists who really become part of the administration, not in cultural departments, but in other departments of the administration, for example, the transport department, and really become experts and have this kind of wild card or carte blanche in order to change the processes of the way the administration works. This is really then a way that the cultural actors can actually influence public administration outside of cultural administration. And I think that would be what I would like to do in this one day. In one day, of course, you don't achieve much. I would rather not go to cultural policy administration. I would rather go to, I don't know, transport or the local Agenda 21 office somewhere or these other policy departments, and then assess. In only one day you cannot do much, but I would try to assess with them using different systems. I've been developing systems games, actually. Village Triangles is one of them, in order to assess where are the contradictions and tensions, and then help them assess where would be the best place to have an embedded artist in order to work with them, of course not for one day, but for the next 2 or 3 years. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's a great answer. Thank you. We will now move to the Netherlands via Serralves again. Dutch artist and innovator Daan Goezegaarde, I believe this is how to pronounce your name, apologies if not, is the head of social design lab Goezegaarde. Its aim is to connect people and technology in artworks that improve daily life in urban environments, spark imagination, and fight the climate crisis. And he will be sharing some of his recent projects showing the beauty of a sustainable society. The floor is yours, Daan.
Thank you. Thank you. If we cannot imagine a better future, we will also not be able to create it, right? We've been talking about the future, but it starts in the brain. We have to wonder, we have to dream, we have to imagine, and only then we can construct it, we can engineer it, we can prototype it. And that's, I think, the power of creativity, of arts and culture, to wonder. That's the reason why I started the studio, the art studio in Rotterdam that you see here in the Netherlands 12 years ago, because I had a lot of ideas about the future and everybody told me they were impossible, right? So how do you fix that? You put some smart people in a room, pizza hotline on the door, and you say, nobody leaves until we have a proposal, right? So it's an old glass factory filled with light, filled with ideas, and I'm the son of a scientist, so technology is such a great tool to make new ideas come true. For example, here, our famous Van Gogh bicycle path, commissioned by the International Van Gogh Foundation, the famous Dutch painter, who wanted to celebrate his 125th anniversary. And they came to me and asked, we don't want to hide him in a museum with a sign, please do not touch, right? We want to activate, we want to make him feel more alive again. And I found the area where he lived and worked here in Eindhoven in 1883, this beautiful bicycle path. And we sort of upgraded with, you know, the glow-in-the-dark little stars that you had on the ceiling when you were a boy or girl? Yeah. Yes, you know what I mean? So they charge at daytime, glow at night. Well, we went back to the lab, make that material more durable. So it charges at daytime and it glows at night. So you can walk through his famous Starry Night. It's still up to date. You can go there every night, no ticket needed. And it's still the most publicized, the most famous bicycle path in the world. It's interesting. For some, it's green energy. For some, it's heritage. For some, it's smart lighting. I hear the locals, it's sort of like a go-to place for first date, right? With your date and do the things you do on a date. I don't want to know about it. But it shows the power of combining infrastructure. Why can't our road or highway be connected to culture, right? As you have here, the famous Eiffel Bridge, 1877, I think we need to be more connecting disciplines rather than isolating them. The Netherlands is, of course, where I'm from, has this struggle with nature. We live below sea level. Without science, without technology, without creative thinking, we would die, right? On the left, you have the sea. On the right, Amsterdam, Rotterdam. And it's because these famous dams, these famous dikes, we survive. In 2017, 832 million euro was allocated to make it future-proof, to strengthen it. And we, as a design firm by the Ministry of Infrastructure, were asked to highlight this iconic structure. This is our Chinese wall. This is our Eiffel Tower. This is, what's holy in Portugal? Okay, this is Eiffel. So, and what we started to do was actually say, okay, we're not going to add more objects. We're going to look at the heritage which is there. 1932, designed by Dirk Rosenberg. These are the floodgates, 60 of them, which open and close the walls of water to keep us safe. Actually, the great-grandfather of Rem Koolhaas, that built Casa da Musica here, we fell in love with them, got the funding to renovate them, make them look like temples, but realized we also wanted to do something with light and future and energy and poetry. But from day one, the ministry said, whatever you do, we love your work, but no maintenance. Because maintenance is always a problem, and everything which technology breaks down because it's salt, rain, heavy weather environment, so no maintenance. So we're like, oh boy, how are we going to do that? And then one cold night, when we were walking there, we realized there's, of course, already light present on this famous highway, which is the light of the cars, right? The headlamps that you see here. So we dragged our Minister of Infrastructure, this is Melanie Schultz, our Minister of Infrastructure, into the story, and adding the buildings a sort of retro-reflective layer, prismas, and sort of mimicking the headlights of the car. 3 years later, she approved the project, 324 people, 30 million euro. This is daytime, this is nighttime, right? So no battery, no solar panel, no energy, the rain keeps it clean. Micro prismas reflect the headlight of the car, making a building energy neutral. When there's car, it lights up, highlighting the famous blueprint of the architect. And when there are no cars, there's no light, so there's no light pollution, which was very important because there was a nature bird migration area nearby. It gives you an example of how pragmatism pushed to such an extreme creates its own poetry. Or here, rising sea level, we all know our climate is changing, but somehow these numbers don't make us change, right? It's weird, we all know it, and we're still building condos on Miami Beach, although we know it's going to get hit. Or we all know smoking is bad, but we still do it. So here we show the impact of climate change, waterlicht, a combination of LEDs and lenses, showing how high water level would be in the nearby future. 60,000 people showed up here in Amsterdam. Some were a bit scared. Is this our future world? Some were more, curious. Should we build floating cities? Can we generate energy from the changing in tide? But most of all, it created a place of wonder, where we are curious about the future, not just scared. And this traveled all around the world, here, United Nations in New York, Paris, London, and it will be in Oberhaus November 5th and 6th. Yeah? So use art, use culture to share a message, to not only focus on policies and numbers, but on experiences, right? On collective experience. That's a way how you make people open for change. Or here, Grow. This was commissioned by Rabobank, one of the largest banks in the world. 51% of all food production, they are somehow involved in terms of investment. And they did something very interesting. Normally they have an artist in residence, so they buy an artwork or a sculpture, put it in the nice lobby, bankers, it's like prestigious and nice. But the new CEO said, I don't want to do that anymore. So they said, we want to work with a living artist, give them a challenge, work with them and make a new artwork, like dialogue. And so Wiebe Dreyer, that CEO, came to me and says, I want you to think in a new creative way about food and agriculture and the need for innovation. Well, to be honest, I'm a self-confessed city boy, right? So I don't know the difference between a carrot or leek when it's in the ground, I'm an expert in many things, but not in food. So the first thing we did was we went to the fields that feed us, right? It's really interesting. We never see them, but they're huge. This is a 20,000 square meter field of leek. And 8 months later, I'll jump into the story, we made Grow what you see here. So Grow, what is Grow? Grow highlights the beauty of agriculture, shining a new light on the places that feed us. But the light recipes that you're seeing here are not just beautiful, they also help the crops to grow better. Short movie.
Vacant, empty, uninhabited. We often dream about creating a better future. Yet we hardly notice the fields that feed us. How can we show the beauty of agriculture? How can we make the farmer the hero? And how can light help crops to grow more sustainably?
GROW is actually inspired by scientific research. It shows specific light recipes can enhance plant growth and reduce the use of pesticide up to 50%.
Step by step, learning, improving, growing.
By combining this scientific research and the need for innovation with poetry, you know, a place of wonder, thousands of people wanting to go there and visit it, it just shows how art can be an activator, right? To open up a dialogue, to do research, how science can improve agriculture. And it was really beautiful to sort of experiment and learn from that. The farmer here, Dennis, looking at his own crops with new eyes, he just kept staring and staring. And it just gives you a glimpse of what happens when we put some smart people in a room and combine sectors instead of isolating them. This will travel to the world to 40 different countries. Each country will have its own light recipe and experience. And last one, we talked about crops. Now let's talk about people. This is typically a project that I self-initiated. We spent way too much time, money, love, and energy on this. Urban sun. So it's inspired by the real sun, 148 million kilometers away from here, which keeps us safe, helps us to grow. Yeah, it makes us feel alive as well, emotional way. And it's of course extreme to see, well, I don't even have to address this, that something so small as a coronavirus is having such a huge impact on our daily lives, right? We're surrounded by barriers. Our friends have been reduced to pixels on a computer screen. Super happy to be here in a conference, one of the first conferences with live people. Our world has changed. Is this our new normal? No. So in 2018, I was reading the science journal Nature about a typical new type of light, far UVC, which apparently kills viruses and is safe for people or animals, right? So traditional UV on the left, you know, 80 years that exist, 254, kills viruses but can give you cancer, right? It damages the eye or your skin. But this new far UVC, the scientists discovered, peer-reviewed, you can look this up online, it's common knowledge, because of the shorter wavelength, cannot penetrate your skin, kills viruses, and is still considered safe. And I was reading the science journal Nature in 2018, 2019, and I was like, whoa. This is not a scientific term, I'm aware of that, but I'm like, the power of light can help us. And so what I did is I contacted those scientists in New York, we teamed up, and this is launched 5 weeks ago, Urban Sun. Of course, the COVID pandemic in March 2020 in Europe started kicking in. The project got speed up. So what is Urban Sun? Well, it sanitizes everything under the black sphere that you see hanging above it. So everything is real-time sanitized with the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second. And we added a sort of visual indicator of yellow gold light so you can see where the safer, better place to meet begins and ends. So this is a place, where you can meet more safely, which is cleaning the virus continuously. So it cleans public spaces in minutes, in seconds. Not to say, oh, we don't need rules anymore, no, but as an extra additional safety layer, but also a symbol of hope. It just shows what happens when you have more than 380 Zoom calls in 1 month with people who are way smarter than me, right? And you combine it, you tell a story. And this was launched, we're getting calls from all around the world, as you can imagine, for schoolyards, public stations, Expo Dubai, Venice Biennale. So we're working on a much, much, much larger one now as well. This is according to the international safety standards by ICNRIP, so we know it's safe. It's supported by the Dutch Ministry Council of Health and Safety in the Netherlands. It shows a glimpse of the power of light, and it shows a world, to conclude, where I think that creativity is our true capital, not the money, not the technology, maybe not even the science, believe it or not, but creativity is our true capital. And again, it just shows that if we can imagine and we have the guts to invest in new ideas, to prototype, to learn, to make a mistake, to upgrade, there is still a whole new world to be discovered. All right, thank you. Yes.
And unfortunately, we don't have much time, so I'll ask you a very quick question. If you could try to answer it in 1 minute, that would be amazing. Your projects are fascinating. However, they do require research, technology, expertise, of course. And this kind of approach towards urban design might be completely out of reach financially for decision makers of small towns. And so my question is, do you think that your approach can somehow inspire small-scale projects without, a huge budget, let's say? And then a very quick question, if you have something to say to add to that issue of what you do if you were a decision maker for a day. Again, in a minute. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's going to be way more expensive if we don't invest in new ideas, because we're just going to be the century of correcting instead of creating. I don't think there's a lack of money in this world. I also don't think there's a lack of technology, but maybe there's a lack of imagination. And I think Europe needs to invest in new ideas, needs to be more curious about the future, and you'll find a way. You'll find a team. You'll find a minister. You'll find a mayor. You kickstart your own project. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. But the thing is, we need to start doing it. We need to start learning it. So I'm highly open for collaborations. I'm highly to what you said as well, the notion of a lab. I want to walk into a city and hear something about the future of energy, the future of food, the future of beauty, the future of waste. And in this collaboration and in this kind of investment, that's where the energy is. So I don't think there's a problem or it's impossible. It's just a question of start doing it. And again, I started 10, 12 years ago with a lot of people saying what I did was impossible. We sort of proved them wrong. But I would love to become part of the new standard, not just the special anymore, right? So that would be. And there is a problem, because if I go Middle East or China, they don't even talk about Europe. It's sad. So we really need to activate the knowledge and the power that we have. And I hope today was a good, the whole day was a good Kickstarter in that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to all of you for your fascinating presentations, also for these quick but so in-depth, thorough, ambitious answers to my questions. It's a pity that we cannot have a conversation after all, but I'm sure that there will be other opportunities. I was asked to summarize or to identify the 3 main takeaways of this panel. Here they are. First, I think that if we are going to achieve environmental sustainability on time to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, we need artists and cultural actors to be involved in these discussions from the beginning, as Mariana and Sasha and also Dan suggested. That's because culture opens up our imagination and it gives us the tool to find better solutions. It also speeds up change in other sectors too. At the EU level, this could mean opening up more calls for proposals within Horizon Europe and beyond to the participation of cultural actors, organizations, and research institutions. Second point, it's about cultural policies. As Sasha suggested, there should be more opportunities for cultural actors and policymakers to come together with sustainable development actors or experts, and for them to work together and holistically. That is, collaboration is necessary not only among actors that create alternatives and implement policies, but also among those who design those policies. And at the EU level, this could mean establishing regular opportunities for different expert groups and working groups to collaborate. Third and finally, the shift to a more environmentally friendly model of development requires a cultural shift from all of us as citizens. And culture can play a key role in nudging us in that direction. But as Enrique and Teresa said, to do that, the sector needs increased resources. Otherwise, it cannot unleash its full potential. That's it for me. I think that after this panel, we can all agree that culture not only inspires us to imagine a sustainable world, but also shows us the way to get there. Thank you to the organizers for the invitation. Muito obrigada. And thank you again to Teresa and Enrique, Mariana, Sasha, and Dan for your talks, and to everyone in the audience for your time and attention. Thank you.
Obrigada por terem todos estado aqui a acompanhar este primeiro dia da conferência. Vamos fechar e vamos esperar pelo dia da amanhã, em que vamos ter mais uma manhã de trabalhos. Muito obrigada a todos e até amanhã.